Maria Theresa, the only female ruler of the Habsburg dominions, ascended to the throne in a world where power was predominantly held by men. Her reign was a testament to resilience and strength, as she navigated wars, political intrigue, and profound reforms. Against the backdrop of the Austrian Succession, she not only defended her empire but also reshaped it, securing a lasting legacy in European history. Maria Theresa's story is one of overcoming immense challenges, defying expectations, and becoming one of Europe's most influential sovereigns, a true matriarch of her time. Maria Theresa of Austria stands as one of the most extraordinary figures in European history. Her reign, spanning from 1740 to 1780, marked a pivotal era not only for the Habsburg monarchy but also for the shifting landscape of European politics and society. When she ascended the throne, the very idea of a woman ruling a major European empire was a matter of intense debate and conflict. She was not simply a figurehead or consort. She was a sovereign ruler, a strategist, a reformer, and above all, a survivor in a world that did not easily yield power to women. Her story is not just a chronicle of wars and treaties, but a testament to the resilience, adaptability, and vision required to govern in an era that challenged her authority at every turn. Maria Theresa's reign began under immediate threat. Her father, Emperor Charles VI, had spent much of his rule trying to secure the succession through the Pragmatic Sanction, a legal decree that recognized his daughter's right to inherit his vast territories. Yet upon his death, many European powers, despite earlier assurances, reneged on their promises. Almost immediately, the War of the Austrian Succession erupted, with rulers like Frederick II of Prussia and Charles Albert of Bavaria challenging her claim. The vulnerability of a young, relatively inexperienced woman at the helm of such a vast empire was seen as an opportunity for territorial gain by ambitious monarchs. Yet against tremendous odds, Maria Theresa not only held her ground but emerged as a shrewd political figure capable of rallying support, modernizing her forces and maintaining most of her territories, despite the painful loss of Silesia. Throughout her 40-year reign, Maria Theresa's influence stretched far beyond the battlefield. She reshaped the Habsburg dominions through a series of sweeping administrative, financial, educational, and military reforms. Recognizing the need for a more centralized and efficient government, she worked tirelessly to reduce the power of regional nobility and religious institutions, strengthening the authority of the crown. Her reforms laid the groundwork for the modernization of the Austrian Empire, creating a more cohesive and resilient state apparatus that would endure long after her death. She was also a deeply pious Catholic, yet her relationship with the Church was characterized by a strong assertion of state control, foreshadowing the broader trend towards secular governance in Europe. Maria Theresa's place in European and Habsburg history is monumental. She was the only female ruler of the Habsburg dominions and the last of the House of Habsburg. Through her marriage to Francis Stephen of Lorraine, she founded the House of Habsburg-Lorraine, ensuring dynastic continuity at a time when the Habsburg legacy teetered on the edge of collapse. Her children were married into the royal houses of France, Naples, Parma, and Tuscany, among others, turning the Habsburgs into a family network that spanned the courts of Europe. Perhaps the most famous of her offspring was Marie Antoinette, who would become Queen of France and whose tragic fate would be deeply intertwined with the legacy of European absolutism that Maria Theresa herself had helped to sustain and reform. The significance of Maria Theresa's rule as a woman in a male-dominated empire cannot be overstated. At a time when political leadership was almost exclusively a male domain, her rise to power challenged fundamental assumptions about gender and governance. She was often underestimated, patronized, and openly defied by male rulers who considered her inferior simply by virtue of her sex. Yet she mastered the art of balancing traditional expectations of femininity, piety, maternity, devotion, with the hard-edged necessities of political rule, command, decision-making, and negotiation. She styled herself not as an empress in her own right, since she technically ruled as Archduchess of Austria and Queen of Hungary and Bohemia, but as the consort of the Holy Roman Emperor Francis I. Nevertheless, in practice, it was Maria Theresa who held real power, a reality acknowledged even by her contemporaries. Her model of rulership demonstrated that a woman could wield sovereign authority with as much competence, vision, and ferocity as any man. At the heart of Maria Theresa's story are several key questions that this documentary seeks to explore. How did she navigate the twin challenges of personal tragedy and public duty in an age that questioned her right to rule? In what ways did her gender shape both her political strategies and the perceptions of her contemporaries? How did she transform the Habsburg state, and what were the lasting effects of her reforms on the future of the empire and Europe more broadly? To what extent did Maria Theresa's devout Catholicism enhance or inhibit her political and social reforms? And finally, how should we assess her legacy today? As a conservative force resisting the tides of Enlightenment change, or as a modernizer laying the foundations for a more centralized, bureaucratic state? These questions compel us to look beyond the simple labels often attached to Maria Theresa, mother, queen, empress, and instead see her as a dynamic and complex ruler who operated in the volatile political environment of 18th-century Europe. Her life illuminates the paradoxes of power, the intersections of gender and governance, and the ways in which tradition and innovation often coexist uneasily within great historical figures. Maria Theresa's reign was not without its contradictions. Her policies were often marked by a tension between progressive reform and conservative social values. She was a champion of education and administrative modernization, yet she remained deeply suspicious of radical Enlightenment ideas. She sought to strengthen the state, yet she also reinforced traditional hierarchies that would later come under revolutionary attack. It is precisely these complexities that make Maria Theresa such a compelling subject for historical exploration. Maria Theresa was born on May 13, 1717, in Vienna, into the glittering but precarious world of the Habsburg imperial court. From the moment of her birth, she was surrounded by immense expectations and heavy dynastic pressures, even if few initially imagined she would one day rule. Her father, Emperor Charles VI, had been desperate for a male heir to secure the succession of the Habsburg dominions. However, after years of disappointment and the death of his only son in infancy, Maria Theresa became the focus of his dynastic hopes. Her mother, Elizabeth Christine of Brunswick-Wolfenbüttel, was a woman of considerable piety and grace, traits that would deeply influence Maria Theresa's own character and worldview. Growing up in the Hofburg Palace, she experienced both the grandeur and the rigidity of Habsburg court life, a world defined by ceremony, hierarchy, and deeply entrenched traditions. Her early education was shaped by the expectations of her gender and her station. As a female member of the royal family, she was trained primarily in the arts deemed appropriate for court life: languages, religion, etiquette, music, and dance. She learned French, Italian, and Latin, and was an accomplished singer and musician. However, unlike a male heir, she received no formal training in statecraft, military strategy, or governance. Despite this, Maria Theresa displayed from an early age a keen intellect, a strong sense of duty, and a passionate commitment to her family and faith. Her personality combined warmth and charm with stubbornness and resolve, qualities that would later define her approach to leadership. She was known for her deep religious devotion, her emotional sincerity, and her intense loyalty to her loved ones, traits that endeared her to many but also sometimes clouded her political judgment. Court life in Vienna during her youth was a dazzling spectacle, but it was also a tightly controlled environment where every action was measured against the expectations of rank and decorum. As a young archduchess, Maria Theresa participated in elaborate rituals and ceremonies that reinforced her understanding of hierarchy and authority. At the same time, the omnipresent threat of dynastic instability loomed large over her upbringing. The Habsburgs' claim to power rested on a complex web of inheritances, treaties, and alliances, all of which could be endangered by a disputed succession. From a young age, Maria Theresa was made acutely aware of the burdens she would bear as the potential heiress to one of Europe's most powerful but vulnerable empires. The Habsburg dynasty into which Maria Theresa was born was one of the most illustrious in European history, yet it was also one increasingly beset by internal weaknesses and external challenges. For centuries, the Habsburgs had ruled a sprawling collection of territories that included Austria, Hungary, Bohemia, and parts of Italy and the Netherlands. Their power rested less on centralized authority than on a patchwork of negotiated allegiances and dynastic marriages. The legacy Maria Theresa would inherit was a vast but fragile empire, held together by tradition, diplomacy, and the prestige of the Habsburg name. However, by the early 18th century, this legacy was under threat. The Habsburgs had suffered significant military defeats, and their European rivals, notably France and Prussia, were eager to exploit any sign of weakness. It was against this backdrop that Emperor Charles VI crafted the Pragmatic Sanction, a legal mechanism intended to secure his daughter's succession. Issued in 1713, the Pragmatic Sanction was a bold attempt to override existing inheritance laws and ensure that Maria Theresa could inherit the entire Habsburg dominions undivided. Charles VI spent the rest of his reign tirelessly lobbying European powers and the regional estates of his own territories to recognize the sanction. It was an exhausting and often humiliating process. He made concessions, granted privileges, and entered into costly alliances to secure agreements from skeptical rulers and nobles. By the time of his death in 1740, Charles VI believed he had succeeded in building a broad consensus around his daughter's right to rule. Yet the reality was far less secure than he imagined. Many of the promises extracted from European powers were given grudgingly, often under duress, or in exchange for territorial or political gains. The moment Charles VI died, the precariousness of Maria Theresa's position became brutally clear. European rulers who had ostensibly recognized the Pragmatic Sanction quickly moved to challenge it. The idea of a female ruler governing the Habsburg lands, and potentially influencing the balance of power in Europe, was deeply unsettling to the patriarchal order of the time. Maria Theresa, at the tender age of 23, found herself not only mourning her father, but also fighting for her very survival as sovereign. The European response to her succession was swift and ruthless. Frederick II of Prussia, a young and ambitious king, saw an opportunity to expand his territory and launched an invasion of Silesia, a wealthy Habsburg province. His justification was thin, a supposed dynastic claim, but his real motive was the strategic and economic value of Silesia. His move shattered any illusion of security that Charles VI's diplomacy had created. Other powers followed suit. France, Bavaria, Spain, and Saxony all sought to carve up the Habsburg inheritance, each advancing their own claims or seeking territorial gains at Maria Theresa's expense. The very concept of a woman wielding sovereign authority over such a vast and strategically important empire was used to justify these acts of aggression. Maria Theresa's legitimacy was challenged not merely by military force, but also through diplomatic and legal maneuvers. Charles Albert of Bavaria, married to a Habsburg princess, claimed the imperial title for himself and was eventually crowned Holy Roman Emperor Charles VII, a devastating blow to Maria Theresa's prestige. The long-standing structure of European politics, with its emphasis on dynastic continuity and male primogeniture, provided little sympathy for her plight. Even those powers that remained nominally neutral or supportive, such as Britain and the Dutch Republic, viewed Maria Theresa as a useful pawn rather than a respected sovereign in her own right. The outbreak of the War of the Austrian Succession in 1740 plunged Europe into a brutal and protracted conflict. For Maria Theresa, the war was a baptism by fire. She was forced to navigate a treacherous landscape of shifting alliances, betrayals, and constant military pressure. Yet despite her youth, inexperience, and the massive disadvantages she faced, she displayed remarkable resilience and political acumen. She appealed directly to the Hungarian nobility for support, famously presenting herself before the Diet of Pressburg, modern-day Bratislava, with her infant son in her arms, moving the assembled nobles to pledge their loyalty and military aid. This dramatic gesture secured a critical ally and helped stabilize her position at a moment of profound vulnerability. Throughout the conflict, Maria Theresa showed an extraordinary ability to learn from her mistakes, to inspire loyalty, and to maintain the coherence of her empire even as territories were lost and battles were fought. She suffered significant setbacks, notably the loss of Silesia, which remained in Prussian hands despite her best efforts. But she also achieved notable victories, preserving the core Habsburg territories and reasserting her authority as queen and archduchess. By the end of the war in 1748, with the signing of the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, Maria Theresa had proven herself not merely a figurehead, but a sovereign ruler of formidable skill and tenacity. The early challenges of her reign forged Maria Theresa into the ruler she would become, pragmatic, resolute, and deeply committed to the survival and strengthening of her dynasty. She would go on to implement far-reaching reforms that modernized her empire and laid the foundations for its continued importance in European affairs. Yet these early years, marked by personal loss, betrayal, and relentless struggle, remained deeply etched into her consciousness. They shaped her understanding of power, loyalty, and governance, and they instilled in her a fierce determination to protect and advance the Habsburg legacy at all costs. Maria Theresa's early life and the crisis of succession that marked her ascent to power are inseparable chapters of her story. They reveal not only the vulnerabilities of a woman ruling in a male-dominated world, but also the extraordinary strength of character required to overcome those vulnerabilities. Her reign began in turmoil but ended in triumph, a testament to her ability to adapt, to endure, and to inspire. In her journey from uncertain heiress to sovereign monarch, Maria Theresa redefined what was possible for women in power and left a legacy that would resonate far beyond the borders of her empire and the era in which she lived. When Maria Theresa ascended the throne in 1740, she was thrust almost immediately into a war for her very existence. The War of the Austrian Succession was not simply a conflict over territory. It was a battle over legitimacy, gender, and the balance of power in Europe. Though her father, Charles VI, had spent much of his reign securing recognition of the pragmatic sanction to guarantee her succession, the true measure of that recognition was tested only upon his death. Almost at once, opportunistic claimants and rival powers moved to seize portions of the Habsburg lands, challenging both the legal and practical foundations of Maria Theresa's authority. The war would last for 8 brutal years, and although Maria Theresa would suffer heavy losses, particularly the rich province of Silesia, she emerged with her dynasty intact and her personal reputation greatly enhanced. The conflict began with the sudden aggression of Frederick II of Prussia, later known as Frederick the Great. Within weeks of Charles VI's death, Frederick invaded Silesia, citing a dubious dynastic claim. In reality, his motive was the wealth and strategic value of the region. Silesia was among the most economically prosperous provinces of the Habsburg monarchy, rich in resources and vital to the empire's military strength. Frederick's swift and brutal move caught the young Maria Theresa off guard. She lacked both the military force to immediately repel him and the political capital to rally her subjects quickly enough to defend her lands. The initial battles of the war set the tone for the struggle to come. At the Battle of Malwitz in April 1741, Frederick's forces decisively defeated the Austrian army. Though he nearly fled the field himself, the strength of his army ensured Prussia's hold on Silesia. This early defeat exposed the weaknesses of the Habsburg military, particularly its outdated command structures and reliance on poorly coordinated forces. Maria Theresa, recognizing these deficiencies, would spend much of her later reign addressing military reform, but at this critical early stage, she was forced to fight with the army she had inherited. Beyond the battlefield, Maria Theresa faced immense diplomatic challenges. Her enemies formed a formidable coalition. France, under Louis XV, saw an opportunity to weaken Austria and expand French influence. Bavaria, led by Charles Albert, harbored ambitions of becoming Holy Roman Emperor himself. Spain, too, had claims on parts of the Habsburg inheritance, particularly in Italy. Together, these powers sought to partition the Habsburg lands among themselves. Maria Theresa found herself isolated, with only limited and often reluctant support from Britain and the Dutch Republic, who were more interested in maintaining the balance of power in Europe than in securing her personal rule. Despite the odds, Maria Theresa demonstrated extraordinary resilience. She personally appealed to the Hungarian nobility for assistance in a dramatic session of the Hungarian Diet at Pressburg. Dressed in mourning clothes and holding her infant son, she addressed the nobles in Latin, invoking their ancient loyalty to the Habsburgs and portraying herself as a vulnerable mother defending her child and her realm. The emotional appeal was a resounding success. The Hungarian magnates pledged troops and resources to her cause, providing her with a crucial military boost at a time of desperate need. This moment not only saved her rule but also cemented her bond with the Hungarian kingdom, a relationship she would continue to nurture throughout her reign. The war was fought across multiple theaters, each presenting unique challenges. In the west, French and Bavarian forces advanced into Austria's heartlands, even occupying Prague. Charles Albert of Bavaria was crowned King of Bohemia and later elected Holy Roman Emperor in 1742, the first non-Habsburg to hold the title in centuries. For Maria Theresa, this was a deeply personal and symbolic defeat. Yet she refused to concede. Her forces gradually regained ground, retaking Prague in 1743 and reasserting control over Bohemia. Her leadership during these campaigns earned her admiration both at home and abroad, bolstering her image as a determined and capable ruler. Meanwhile, in Italy, Spanish and French forces sought to wrest control of Austrian-held territories, such as Milan and Tuscany. The Italian campaigns were complex and often indecisive, draining Austrian resources and exposing the logistical challenges of maintaining distant possessions. Nevertheless, Maria Theresa's generals managed to hold key positions, preventing a complete collapse of Habsburg influence in the region. The struggle for Silesia, however, remained the central theater of the war. Despite multiple attempts, Maria Theresa was unable to dislodge Frederick from the province. The Prussian army, highly disciplined and led with tactical brilliance, proved a formidable opponent. Battles such as Kotusitz in 1742 and Hohenfriedberg in 1745 reinforced Prussian dominance in Silesia. Frederick's military successes elevated his status as one of Europe's great commanders and marked the rise of Prussia as a significant power. Maria Theresa, though personally indignant at the loss, came to recognize that the continued expenditure of blood and treasure to recover Silesia would endanger the rest of her empire. This reluctant acceptance of Silesia's loss would shape her future foreign policy, leading her to focus on strengthening her remaining territories and forging alliances aimed at containing Prussian ambition. The broader political landscape of the war shifted constantly. Alliances formed and collapsed with dizzying speed, often dictated by the fluctuating fortunes of battle and the intricate web of dynastic ties that bound European courts. Britain, increasingly concerned with France's growing strength, lent Maria Theresa financial and military support, viewing the survival of the Habsburg monarchy as essential to maintaining the balance of power. The Dutch Republic, too, saw the necessity of supporting Austria, though its contributions were often tepid. Russia, initially distant from the conflict, began to assert greater interest in Central European affairs, foreshadowing its later role in continental politics. Maria Theresa herself grew increasingly adept at the game of diplomacy. Though she never abandoned her deeply held moral convictions, she learned to engage in the realpolitik necessary for survival. She negotiated tirelessly to secure allies, leveraging marriages, treaties, and mutual defense pacts. She recognized the necessity of pragmatism, even when it conflicted with personal sentiment or dynastic pride. Her experiences during the war taught her that moral righteousness alone would not preserve her crown. Strategic calculation and a readiness to compromise were equally essential. By the mid-1740s, the tide of war began to turn in Maria Theresa's favor. Her forces recaptured much of Bohemia and secured critical victories in Italy. The death of Charles Albert of Bavaria in 1745 removed one of her most determined rivals. His son, Maximilian III Joseph, made peace with Austria, allowing Maria Theresa's husband, Francis Stephen of Lorraine, to be elected Holy Roman Emperor as Francis I. Though Maria Theresa retained real power, this coronation symbolized the restoration of Habsburg prestige within the empire. Yet the conflict dragged on, exhausting all parties involved. The Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, signed in 1748, brought the war to a formal end. The treaty largely restored the status quo ante bellum. Territories captured during the conflict were returned to their pre-war owners, with a few notable exceptions. Most significantly, Prussia retained control of Silesia, a bitter pill for Maria Theresa to swallow. She had fought valiantly and preserved the bulk of her inheritance, but the loss of Silesia remained a glaring wound to Habsburg pride and power. The treaty reflected the growing reality that Europe was entering a new era of balance of power politics. Old certainties, the dominance of France, the primacy of Austria, were being challenged by new forces such as Prussia and increasingly Russia. Maria Theresa emerged from the war wiser, more experienced, and more determined to modernize her state to meet these challenges. Her loss of Silesia, while painful, acted as a catalyst for a series of sweeping reforms. She initiated military, administrative, and financial changes designed to strengthen the Habsburg monarchy from within. She expanded the standing army, introduced more efficient tax collection systems, and began centralizing authority, reducing the autonomy of regional nobility where possible. The impact of the war on Maria Theresa's reputation was profound. Initially seen by many as a vulnerable and inexperienced young woman, she proved herself a ruler of extraordinary courage and resilience. Her ability to rally her subjects, adapt to changing circumstances, and persevere in the face of overwhelming odds earned her widespread admiration. Even those who had doubted her capacity for leadership were forced to acknowledge her tenacity and political skill. Moreover, the war redefined her identity as a monarch. No longer merely the daughter of Charles VI or the wife of Francis Stephen, Maria Theresa established herself as a sovereign in her own right. She commanded armies, directed foreign policy, and navigated the treacherous currents of European diplomacy with growing confidence. Her gender, initially seen as a liability, became part of her legend, the young woman who stood against kings and emperors to defend her dynasty and her people. The War of the Austrian Succession was thus a crucible for Maria Theresa. It shaped her worldview, hardened her resolve, and laid the groundwork for the reforms that would transform the Habsburg monarchy. Though she suffered losses, she also achieved remarkable successes, preserving her empire and securing her family's future. In doing so, she not only ensured the survival of the Habsburgs, but also redefined what it meant to be a female ruler in a male-dominated world. The lessons she learned on the battlefields and in the courts of Europe would guide her throughout the remainder of her long and consequential reign, influencing every decision she made and every policy she pursued. Maria Theresa's marriage to Francis Stephen of Lorraine remains one of the most significant love stories in the history of European monarchies, remarkable not only for its personal warmth, but also for its profound political consequences. The two first met as teenagers at the Viennese court, and their bond developed into a deep and lasting affection, something unusual in a period when royal marriages were usually diplomatic arrangements devoid of romance. Charles VI, recognizing both Francis's noble lineage and the mutual affection between him and his daughter, initially encouraged their relationship but later hesitated, concerned about the implications of uniting the Habsburg crown with the modest Duchy of Lorraine. Nevertheless, Maria Theresa's determination prevailed, and the couple married in 1736. Their marriage was a genuine partnership in every sense. Francis Stephen, though less politically astute than his wife, provided unwavering emotional support. Maria Theresa valued his counsel, even though she was the dominant figure in governance. Upon Charles VI's death, Maria Theresa assumed control of the Habsburg dominions, and Francis played a secondary but vital role. In 1745 he was elected Holy Roman Emperor, becoming Francis I, but it was understood that Maria Theresa remained the true sovereign authority within the empire. She once famously declared, "I wish to be praised as a loving wife rather than a successful ruler," highlighting her view of personal loyalty as central to her identity. Their personal relationship was characterized by deep devotion, mutual respect, and genuine affection. Despite the pressures of governance, war, and dynastic politics, Maria Theresa and Francis shared a closeness rare among royal couples. She often turned to him for solace and comfort during difficult times, especially during the long and grueling War of the Austrian Succession. However, their marriage was not without its strains. Francis's known infidelities were a source of sorrow for Maria Theresa, whose Catholic upbringing and intense sense of personal morality left her deeply wounded by his occasional lapses. Nevertheless, she forgave him repeatedly, recognizing the larger importance of their partnership, both as a political alliance and a personal bond. Together, they had 16 children over 20 years, a staggering achievement by any measure. Among their children were several who would play crucial roles in European history, most famously Marie Antoinette, who became Queen of France. Others, like Joseph II, Leopold II, and Maria Carolina, also had significant political careers. Maria Theresa's role as a mother was central to her identity, and she was deeply involved in the upbringing of her children. She viewed motherhood not only as a personal duty, but as a political responsibility, raising her children to secure advantageous dynastic marriages that would strengthen the Habsburg position across Europe. Motherhood profoundly influenced Maria Theresa's policies. She was driven by a deep sense of duty to provide stability and security for her descendants. Her dynastic strategy involved marrying her children into the leading royal families of Europe, weaving a web of alliances intended to protect and extend Habsburg influence. At the same time, she championed educational reforms, motivated in part by her desire to improve the moral and intellectual development of her subjects as she had sought for her own children. Her maternal instincts extended to her governance style, where she often viewed her subjects as members of a larger family over which she had both authority and care. The personal tragedies she suffered, the deaths of several of her children, and eventually of Francis Stephen himself in 1765, only deepened her resilience. The loss of Francis was a devastating blow. Maria Theresa never fully recovered from her grief. She wore mourning black for the remainder of her life and withdrew somewhat from public life, though she continued to exert considerable influence over her successor, Joseph II. Her mourning was not only an expression of personal sorrow, but also a reaffirmation of the ideal of loyalty and devotion she had always embodied. Even as she grieved, Maria Theresa undertook some of the most significant administrative reforms of her reign. Realizing that the war had exposed profound weaknesses in the Habsburg system, she embarked on a comprehensive reorganization of the empire's bureaucratic and fiscal structures. Centralization of power became a guiding principle of her governance. Determined to reduce the autonomy that local nobles and regional estates had traditionally enjoyed, she worked to create a more efficient, standardized administration that answered directly to the central government in Vienna. One of her primary achievements was the reformation of the bureaucracy. She established new government departments, appointed professional administrators based on merit rather than birth, and standardized procedures across the diverse Habsburg lands. These changes created a more predictable and uniform system of governance, reducing corruption and inefficiency. Maria Theresa introduced regular audits of provincial administrations and instituted more rigorous oversight of local officials. The professionalization of the civil service laid the foundation for the modern Austrian bureaucracy, elements of which would endure into the Austro-Hungarian Empire and beyond. Taxation reform was another cornerstone of her administrative overhaul. Under the old system, taxation was wildly inconsistent, with nobles often exempt from paying taxes altogether, while the burden fell disproportionately on the peasantry. Maria Theresa sought to change this. She introduced a system of direct taxation that included the nobility, a radical move that provoked fierce resistance, but ultimately succeeded in creating a fairer and more reliable revenue stream for the crown. She conducted cadastral surveys, detailed assessments of land ownership and value, which allowed for more equitable tax distribution. Although she had to compromise in some areas, particularly in Hungary where the nobility retained their tax exemptions, the overall result was a significant increase in royal revenues and greater financial stability for the empire. In reigning in the nobility, Maria Theresa struck a delicate balance. She recognized that outright confrontation with the aristocracy could destabilize the empire, so she pursued a gradual strategy of reducing their power while preserving their dignity. She offered the nobility roles in the new bureaucracy, integrating them into the system rather than simply marginalizing them. She also reformed the legal system to ensure greater equality before the law, diminishing the judicial privileges that nobles had long enjoyed. These changes reflected her broader vision of a more centralized, rational state, where personal status and traditional privileges were subordinated to the needs of the monarchy and the common good. Maria Theresa's reforms also extended to education and public health, areas she saw as vital to the strength of the state. She mandated compulsory primary education for both boys and girls, a revolutionary idea at the time. Her educational policies aimed not just at creating loyal subjects, but at cultivating a more productive and enlightened populace. In health, she oversaw improvements in sanitation, the establishment of military hospitals, and the promotion of smallpox inoculation, all of which contributed to a healthier and more resilient population. These reforms reflected her belief that a strong empire required not just strong armies and taxes, but an educated, healthy, and morally upright citizenry. The administrative and fiscal changes Maria Theresa initiated during her reign provided the structural foundation for the later Austro-Hungarian Empire. Her work in centralization and modernization enabled her successors to build a more cohesive and powerful state apparatus. Though she faced persistent challenges from regional identities, linguistic diversity, and the entrenched privileges of local elites, her reforms made possible a new vision of governance that emphasized the primacy of the state over the patchwork of traditional loyalties that had characterized the Habsburg monarchy for centuries. Her legacy in these areas is often overshadowed by the drama of her wars and the glamour of her court, but in truth, it was these administrative achievements that had the most lasting impact. By professionalizing the bureaucracy, rationalizing the tax system, curbing the power of the nobility, and investing in education and health, Maria Theresa transformed the Habsburg lands from a loosely connected collection of territories into a more centralized and effective polity. Her reforms endured long after her death, influencing the shape and resilience of the Austrian Empire well into the 19th century. Throughout these efforts, Maria Theresa's motivations remained deeply personal. She saw herself as the mother of her people, responsible for their welfare and improvement. Her vision of rulership was not based solely on power, but on duty and care. Just as she strove to educate, guide, and protect her own children, she sought to uplift and strengthen her subjects. This maternal vision of governance, blending love with authority, created a uniquely personal and moral foundation for her reforms. It was a vision rooted in her profound sense of responsibility and her unwavering Catholic faith, which informed her belief that rulers were accountable not only to their people, but also to God. In the end, Maria Theresa's marriage to Francis Stephen, her role as a mother, and her sweeping administrative reforms were deeply interconnected facets of her rule. They reflected the same core values of loyalty, duty, care, and pragmatism that defined her entire life. Her partnership with Francis gave her emotional strength. Her children embodied her hopes for the future. Her reforms were the instruments through which she sought to secure that future. Together, they paint a portrait of a ruler who was at once deeply human and profoundly consequential, a woman who reshaped her world through a combination of love, resilience, and visionary leadership. The loss of Silesia during the War of the Austrian Succession was a wound Maria Theresa never fully accepted. Although the Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle in 1748 had brought a temporary peace, she saw it more as an armistice than a resolution. Determined not to accept permanent defeat, she embarked on a massive overhaul of the Habsburg military and a careful restructuring of her foreign alliances. Her military reforms were a direct response to the humiliations she had suffered, and they marked a new phase in her reign characterized by a steely resolve to recover Austria's prestige and lost territories. One of Maria Theresa's primary military objectives after 1748 was the modernization of the army. Recognizing the Habsburg forces' weaknesses compared to the agile and disciplined Prussian military under Frederick the Great, she undertook comprehensive reforms. These included standardizing training, improving discipline, and introducing more meritocratic principles in officer promotions. She restructured the command hierarchy to ensure clearer lines of authority and accountability, a critical step toward professionalizing what had been a somewhat fragmented military apparatus. A significant focus was placed on logistics, the ability to supply and move armies effectively, which had often been the Achilles heel of Austrian campaigns. Military academies were expanded and updated to train a new generation of officers in modern tactics and strategy. Funding for the military was also significantly increased, made possible by her earlier fiscal reforms, and new fortifications were constructed along vulnerable borders. Maria Theresa's military reforms were not solely technical. They reflected a profound cultural shift within the empire, fostering a sense of national pride and resilience that would bear fruit in the coming decades. Parallel to these internal reforms, Maria Theresa also turned her attention outward, seeking to reshape Austria's position in the complex and shifting web of European diplomacy. One of her boldest moves was the orchestrated realignment of traditional alliances, culminating in what historians call the diplomatic revolution of 1756. Traditionally, Austria had allied with Britain against France, but Maria Theresa, guided by her brilliant statesman Wenzel Anton Kaunitz, engineered a dramatic shift. She abandoned Britain and instead allied with France, Austria's old enemy, seeing it as essential to counter the growing threat of Prussia. This diplomatic reorientation was nothing short of revolutionary in the European context, breaking centuries-old patterns of rivalry and alliance. The Franco-Austrian alliance was cemented by the marriage of Maria Theresa's daughter, Marie Antoinette, to the French Dauphin, the future Louis XVI, symbolizing a new era of cooperation between the two former enemies. Maria Theresa also secured alliances with Russia and Sweden, creating a broad coalition aimed at containing Prussia and reversing the losses suffered in the previous war. The diplomatic revolution set the stage for renewed conflict. The tensions between Austria and Prussia remained unresolved, and Frederick the Great, ever wary of encirclement, acted first. In 1756, he launched a preemptive strike against Saxony, an ally of Austria, thereby triggering the 7 Years' War. Maria Theresa's objectives in this new war were clear: to reclaim Silesia and to reassert Austria's dominance in Central Europe. The 7 Years' War, which raged from 1756 to 1763, was a truly global conflict, but at its heart was the struggle between Austria and Prussia for dominance in the German-speaking world. Maria Theresa entered the war with a stronger, better-prepared military and a formidable set of alliances, but the conflict would prove far more challenging than she anticipated. Frederick the Great, though facing a coalition that included Austria, France, Russia, Sweden, and Saxony, displayed extraordinary military brilliance, winning a series of remarkable victories against often superior forces. Despite the coalition's advantages on paper, coordination among the Allies was poor, and logistical challenges persisted. Austrian forces, though much improved, still struggled to match the speed and flexibility of Frederick's army. Key battles, such as the Battle of Rossbach, 1757, and the Battle of Leuthen, 1757, saw Prussia decisively defeat its enemies, undermining the momentum of the anti-Prussian coalition. Yet Maria Theresa remained undaunted. She maintained a steadfast determination to wear down Frederick through attrition and political pressure. Austrian forces achieved notable successes, particularly under the leadership of commanders like Leopold von Daun, who won the Battle of Kolin in 1757, forcing Frederick to retreat from Bohemia. Additionally, Russia's entry into the war placed Frederick under enormous strain, and for a time it seemed as though Prussia might be overwhelmed. The relationship between Maria Theresa and Frederick the Great during this period was one of mutual loathing and grudging respect. Maria Theresa saw Frederick as a usurper and a villain, while Frederick, for all his contemptuous remarks about the Empress Queen, recognized her as a formidable and relentless adversary. Their rivalry came to define the Central European theater of the war, with each seeking not just territorial gains, but also a decisive affirmation of their respective political visions. However, fortune intervened in Frederick's favor. The sudden death of Empress Elizabeth of Russia in 1762 and the accession of Peter III, an ardent admirer of Frederick, led to Russia's abrupt withdrawal from the conflict. This so-called miracle of the House of Brandenburg saved Prussia from collapse. Without Russian support, Austria and its allies could not maintain the pressure, and the war ground toward a stalemate. The Treaty of Hubertusburg in 1763 ended the conflict in Europe. It largely restored the status quo ante bellum. Silesia remained firmly in Prussian hands, and Austria had to accept that the balance of power in Central Europe had permanently shifted. Though Maria Theresa had failed to achieve her principal war aim, the recovery of Silesia, she had succeeded in preserving the core Habsburg territories and in strengthening Austria internally. The war left a profound impact on Maria Theresa and on the Habsburg monarchy. Although she had not regained Silesia, the military and administrative reforms she had initiated had made Austria a more modern and resilient state. Her experiences in the war also deepened her understanding of the limitations of brute military force and the importance of internal stability and reform. Moreover, the alliances she had forged during the diplomatic revolution laid the groundwork for Austria's continued influence in European affairs. Emotionally, the war years took a heavy toll on Maria Theresa. She had invested enormous personal energy and hope into the conflict, and the failure to reclaim Silesia was a bitter disappointment. Nevertheless, she bore the defeat with characteristic stoicism, turning her energies toward further internal consolidation and social reform. She intensified efforts to centralize authority, promote economic development, and enhance the efficiency of the Habsburg administration. The loss of Silesia, in the long run, also had the unintended effect of focusing Austrian ambitions southward and eastward, leading to greater involvement in the Balkans and setting the stage for future conflicts with the Ottoman Empire. Maria Theresa's reign thus marked a crucial turning point in the strategic orientation of the Habsburg monarchy. In the personal rivalry between Maria Theresa and Frederick the Great, history has often judged Frederick the victor. Yet Maria Theresa's achievements were in many ways more profound. She preserved and strengthened a multi-ethnic empire in an era of immense challenges, modernized its institutions, and laid the foundations for the future success of Austria. Her resilience in the face of military setbacks, her ability to learn and adapt, and her commitment to the welfare of her subjects left a legacy far deeper than territorial conquests. The 7 Years' War also demonstrated the changing nature of warfare and diplomacy in the 18th century. It was no longer enough to rely on traditional alliances and dynastic marriages. Modern states required professional armies, efficient administrations, and active engagement in global commerce and politics. Maria Theresa, through her military and administrative reforms, ensured that Austria remained a major player on the European stage, capable of competing in this new, more complex world. Maria Theresa's post-Silesian military and foreign policy efforts were marked by a combination of boldness, resilience, and pragmatism. She dared to realign Austria's diplomatic relationships, overhauled its military capabilities, and fought one of the greatest military minds of the age to a standstill. Though she could not reverse the loss of Silesia, she preserved the strength and integrity of her empire, ensuring that Austria would continue to play a central role in European politics for generations to come. Her reign, particularly during and after the 7 Years' War, exemplified the qualities of leadership, perseverance, and vision that would make her one of the most respected and influential rulers of the 18th century. Maria Theresa's rule over the Habsburg Empire was shaped as much by her devout Catholicism as by her political ambitions. Religion was not merely a private matter for her, it was a foundation for order, morality, and governance. Deeply influenced by her faith, she viewed Catholicism as a necessary glue to hold together the multi-ethnic and multilingual fabric of her empire. However, her understanding of religious authority was nuanced. While she revered the traditions of the Church and adhered to its teachings, she was also determined to ensure that ecclesiastical power did not rival her own. This determination led her to assert significant state control over church matters within her dominions. Maria Theresa's religious worldview was traditional and conservative. She saw herself as a guardian of Catholic orthodoxy and moral rectitude, which drove her efforts to impose Catholic values on her subjects. At the same time, she was aware that religion could be used as a political tool to strengthen the authority of the state. She systematically curtailed the influence of the papacy within her territories, affirming that the sovereign, not the pope, held ultimate authority in secular and even some ecclesiastical matters. This tension between personal devotion and political necessity defined her approach to church-state relations. Under her rule, the Austrian state took firm control of appointments to church offices, regulated church finances, and limited the judicial power of the clergy. She created a system in which the state could oversee the education and conduct of the clergy, ensuring their loyalty to imperial authority. One of her boldest moves was her decision to require the licensing of papal bulls and decrees before they could be disseminated within her lands, an assertion of sovereignty that would have been unthinkable in earlier eras. Despite her piety, Maria Theresa showed no hesitation in placing the interests of the Habsburg state above the Church's spiritual autonomy. Her policies toward religious minorities were often harsh by modern standards, but reflected the prevailing sentiments of the time. She viewed Protestantism with deep suspicion, associating it with rebellion, foreign influence, and moral laxity. Protestants in her lands faced restrictions on public worship, civic participation, and education. In some cases, they were forced to convert or emigrate. The Jesuits, a powerful Catholic order with strong ties to Rome, initially enjoyed her protection, but as their influence grew, Maria Theresa began to question their role. Eventually, she allowed their suppression in line with broader European trends, though she continued to value their role in education. Her approach to the Jewish population was particularly severe. Motivated by a mix of religious prejudice and economic nationalism, she imposed heavy taxes, enforced residential restrictions, and even ordered expulsions from certain regions. She viewed the Jewish communities as alien elements in a Catholic state, and her policies reflected an effort to reduce their presence and influence. However, as economic realities evolved and the need for productive citizens became clearer, some of these restrictions were gradually eased, though not always with her personal enthusiasm. While religion framed much of Maria Theresa's worldview, she also recognized the value of learning and culture in creating a strong, cohesive society. Her reign marked a significant turning point in the development of public education in the Habsburg lands. Inspired by Enlightenment ideas, even if she remained cautious about their more radical implications, she introduced sweeping educational reforms that would shape generations to come. One of her key achievements was the establishment of a state-controlled, standardized education system. In 1774, she issued the General School Ordinance, which laid the foundation for compulsory primary education throughout the empire. This landmark reform required children between the ages of 6 and 12 to attend school, regardless of gender or social class. The curriculum emphasized reading, writing, arithmetic, and religious instruction. These efforts were rooted in her belief that a well-informed, morally upright citizenry was essential to the health of the state. The implementation of this system was not without its challenges. In rural areas, schools were often poorly staffed and underfunded. Resistance from local communities and church officials, who feared state intrusion into their traditional educational roles, further complicated the process. Nonetheless, the mere fact that such a system was attempted, and over time, improved, represented a major step forward in the modernization of education in Central Europe. Maria Theresa also invested heavily in elite institutions. She supported the growth of the University of Vienna and established the Thersieum in 1746, a prestigious academy dedicated to training the empire's future civil servants and diplomats. This institution reflected her desire to cultivate a capable, loyal, and educated administrative class. The curriculum combined classical studies with modern languages, history, and political science, an embodiment of Enlightenment ideals adapted to imperial needs. The intellectual atmosphere of Maria Theresa's reign was marked by a delicate balancing act. On one hand, she welcomed Enlightenment thinkers and encouraged scientific inquiry. On the other, she remained deeply suspicious of ideas that challenged religious orthodoxy or traditional hierarchies. Philosophers and scientists were granted patronage, but censorship remained strict. Books deemed subversive or heretical were banned, and surveillance of intellectual activity was common. In this sense, Maria Theresa's cultural reforms were characterized by a selective embrace of progress, a desire for improvement without revolution. Her promotion of music, art, and architecture also left a lasting mark. The Baroque and Rococo styles flourished during her reign, supported by both religious and secular commissions. Vienna became a vibrant cultural hub, drawing composers, artists, and scholars from across Europe. Music, in particular, held a central place in court life, with figures like Haydn beginning to make their mark. These cultural developments contributed not only to the prestige of the Habsburg dynasty, but also to the creation of a shared imperial identity among its diverse peoples. Economic modernization was another critical pillar of Maria Theresa's reign. She inherited a state with vast but underdeveloped resources, inefficient administration, and a heavy reliance on noble privilege. Through a series of reforms, she sought to strengthen the economic foundations of the monarchy, expand state revenue, and reduce the power of entrenched elites. Her agrarian policies were shaped by a desire to improve productivity while preserving social order. Recognizing the importance of the peasantry to the empire's economy and stability, she attempted to curtail some of the most oppressive feudal practices. Although she stopped short of abolishing serfdom outright, she introduced regulations limiting forced labor and allowing peasants to appeal to state authorities in disputes with landlords. These reforms were unevenly enforced, but they signaled a shift toward a more interventionist role for the state in rural life. Commercial development was another focus. Maria Theresa pursued a form of mercantilism aimed at making Austria economically self-sufficient and competitive. She supported the development of domestic industries, offered subsidies to key sectors, and encouraged the growth of internal trade. Infrastructure improvements, such as new roads and canals, facilitated the movement of goods and people, binding the empire's disparate regions more closely together. Customs policies were revised to create a more coherent economic zone within the empire. She reduced internal tariffs and sought to standardize weights, measures, and coinage, reforms that laid the groundwork for a more integrated market. At the same time, she tightened control over trade with foreign powers, particularly the Ottoman Empire and various German states, in order to protect domestic producers. Taxation reform was also central to her economic agenda. Under Maria Theresa, the tax burden was extended more evenly across social classes. The nobility, previously exempt from many forms of taxation, was gradually brought into the fiscal system. This was a politically sensitive move, and she had to tread carefully to avoid provoking rebellion among the aristocracy. Still, her efforts succeeded in increasing state revenue and reducing the empire's dependence on loans and extraordinary levies. Legal reform accompanied her economic initiatives. The Habsburg legal system had long been a patchwork of regional codes and feudal privileges, often inconsistent and arbitrary. Maria Theresa undertook a project of codification that aimed to unify and rationalize the laws of the empire. The result was the publication of several comprehensive legal codes, including reforms in civil, criminal, and commercial law. These efforts did not always produce immediate harmony, but they represented a major step toward the rule of law and the standardization of justice. Her legal reforms emphasized fairness and accessibility. Torture, while not entirely abolished during her reign, was increasingly restricted, and trial procedures were improved to reduce the scope for corruption and abuse. The rights of defendants were expanded, and judicial offices were subjected to more rigorous oversight. These changes reflected a growing belief in the importance of justice as a cornerstone of enlightened rule, though always within the bounds of Maria Theresa's conservative values. Through these various reforms in religion, education, culture, economics, and law, Maria Theresa transformed the Habsburg monarchy into a more centralized, efficient, and modern state. Her reign marked the beginning of a shift from a medieval empire of nobles and clergy to a modern bureaucratic monarchy. She faced opposition, setbacks, and contradictions, but her resolve and vision left a profound legacy. Her personal blend of devotion and pragmatism shaped every policy she pursued. While never a revolutionary, she was undoubtedly a reformer. Maria Theresa's ability to marry tradition with innovation made her one of the most effective and admired rulers of her age. She balanced the imperatives of faith and reason, stability and change, authority and justice, ensuring that the empire she passed on to her son Joseph II was stronger, more unified, and better prepared for the challenges of the modern world. Maria Theresa's reign left a profound and lasting imprint on the Habsburg monarchy, on European politics, and on the concept of female leadership in a patriarchal world. Her rule, spanning 4 decades, was marked by war, reform, tragedy, and triumph. She came to power amid controversy, fought to secure her dominion through the War of the Austrian Succession, and spent the remainder of her life striving to modernize and strengthen the vast, unwieldy Habsburg domains. The historical evaluation of her reign reveals a complex blend of achievement and limitation, success and struggle, an enduring testament to her skill as a ruler and her resilience as a woman. One of her greatest accomplishments was the stabilization and centralization of the Habsburg monarchy after a period of considerable vulnerability. When she ascended the throne, the empire was fragmented, underfinanced, and militarily weak. Through administrative reforms, legal restructuring, and a focused drive to strengthen the treasury, she managed to lay the groundwork for a more efficient and coherent state apparatus. She introduced a professional bureaucracy, rationalized tax collection, and curbed the influence of self-interested provincial nobles. These reforms laid the institutional foundations that would support the later Austro-Hungarian Empire. Militarily, her reign was more defensive than expansionist. Though she lost the wealthy province of Silesia to Prussia, a bitter and humiliating blow, she managed to preserve the bulk of her empire and maintain the Habsburg presence as a dominant force in European affairs. Her military reforms after the War of the Austrian Succession and during the 7 Years' War helped modernize the imperial army. While she did not achieve all of her military goals, her emphasis on readiness, training, and strategy ensured that Austria would remain a significant power. Socially and culturally, Maria Theresa promoted stability and unity in an empire known for its diversity. She fostered a strong Catholic identity, which served as a unifying force across her multilingual and multi-ethnic domains. However, her religious policies also drew criticism for their intolerance. She expelled Protestants from certain territories, placed tight controls on the Jewish population, and resisted religious pluralism. Her treatment of religious minorities reflected the tension between her personal piety and the growing intellectual trends of Enlightenment Europe. Despite this conservatism, she did begin to soften religious policy late in her reign, setting the stage for Joseph II's broader toleration decrees. In education, her impact was nothing short of revolutionary. She made primary schooling compulsory, a pioneering move in the region. She founded the Versailles and promoted academic excellence through institutional support and curriculum reform. These efforts significantly raised literacy rates and cultivated a more educated bureaucratic class. While she was not herself a philosopher queen like Catherine the Great, she recognized the value of education for statecraft and stability. Economically, Maria Theresa pursued a cautious modernization. Her reforms promoted agriculture, sought to expand internal trade, and encouraged the growth of manufacturing. Though she retained aspects of mercantilist thought, she worked to streamline customs and tax structures and attempted to harmonize economic practices across provinces. She also invested in infrastructure, particularly roads and canals, to facilitate commerce and military mobility. Her economic vision was pragmatic and state-oriented, focused less on wealth generation for its own sake than on the prosperity and cohesion of the empire. In law, she introduced the Codex Versailles, an attempt at comprehensive legal codification. Though incomplete during her lifetime, it signaled a move toward a more rational and standardized judicial system. Her legal reforms also addressed issues of corporal punishment, judicial corruption, and peasant rights. Though again, these were carefully balanced so as not to provoke aristocratic resistance. Her failures are part of her legacy as well. The loss of Silesia remained a psychological and strategic wound. Her religious intolerance, particularly her anti-Semitic edicts and suppression of non-Catholic Christians, has drawn modern criticism. Her resistance to Enlightenment reforms, especially those proposed by her son Joseph II, sometimes hampered the very progress she had helped set in motion. Yet these limitations reflect her deeply held convictions rather than a lack of vision. She prioritized stability, Catholic unity, and dynastic continuity above ideological experimentation. Maria Theresa's legacy within the Austrian Empire is immense. She shaped the modern Austrian state more than perhaps any other monarch before the 19th century. Her reforms became the scaffolding upon which future generations of Habsburgs would build. Even Joseph II, who diverged sharply from her in policy, benefited from the structures she created. Her emphasis on centralized governance, competent administration, and strategic diplomacy ensured that Austria remained a coherent and functioning entity in the volatile European landscape. Her descendants carried her influence across the continent. The Habsburg-Lorraine line she established extended into multiple royal houses. Most famously, her daughter Marie Antoinette became Queen of France, though her fate during the French Revolution revealed the perils of dynastic politics. Other children married into Spanish, Neapolitan, and Italian nobility, extending Habsburg influence. The political marriages arranged by Maria Theresa reflected the traditional Habsburg strategy of diplomatic consolidation and alliance building. Her bloodline continued to shape European royalty for generations, and her example as a matriarchal ruler influenced royal consorts and queens throughout the continent. In the broader realm of historical memory, Maria Theresa has occupied a distinguished and often romanticized place. In Austrian national consciousness, she is remembered as a mother figure, both literally and symbolically. Her image adorned public buildings, coins, and educational institutions. Statues of her in Vienna and other cities celebrated her as a guardian of tradition and progress. Historians in the 19th and early 20th centuries often portrayed her as a paragon of female rulership, firm yet maternal, devout yet intelligent, conservative yet effective. Modern scholarship has provided a more nuanced picture. Historians now emphasize the complexity of her political and religious beliefs, her skill in navigating gendered expectations, and the long-term effects of her policies. Feminist historians in particular have examined the ways she wielded power in a world structured against her, using maternal rhetoric, dynastic imagery, and moral authority to legitimize her rule. Others have critiqued her religious intolerance or questioned the inclusivity of her reforms. Yet even these critical perspectives affirm her significance. Few rulers have provoked such sustained and varied scholarly interest. Maria Theresa's cultural presence extends far beyond academia. In art, literature, and popular culture, she has been a recurring figure of fascination. Portraits of her from her lifetime depict a stately, serious monarch, often adorned in regal attire and surrounded by symbols of dynastic authority. Posthumous representations softened her image, emphasizing her motherhood and virtue. Statues erected in her honor often feature her holding a scepter or surrounded by advisors and children, reflecting both her political and maternal identities. Her life inspired numerous literary works, ranging from historical novels to dramas. She has been portrayed as a shrewd political operator, a devoted wife, and a tragic figure torn between tradition and modernity. In Austria, she appears in school textbooks, television documentaries, and historical reenactments. Her image is a mainstay of Vienna's touristic and cultural branding, second only perhaps to Empress Elizabeth in public iconography. In film and television, Maria Theresa has been the subject of both factual and dramatized treatments. Historical dramas have often emphasized her youth, her struggles for legitimacy, and her romantic partnership with Francis Stephen. These portrayals balance her public achievements with personal narratives, presenting her as a multidimensional character. While some adaptations take liberties with the facts, they help sustain public interest in her legacy. The persistence of Maria Theresa in public memory underscores her unique role in European history. Few monarchs, male or female, have managed to blend personal charisma, political skill, and dynastic success so effectively. Her ability to govern a vast and fractious empire, raise a politically significant family, and maintain legitimacy in a male-dominated sphere makes her one of the most compelling figures of the early modern period. Public commemorations in Austria and Central Europe frequently invoke her name. Streets, schools, and institutions bear her name. Anniversary celebrations of her birth and death are marked with exhibitions and academic conferences. In times of political upheaval, Austrian leaders have sometimes referenced her as a symbol of unity and perseverance. Her embodiment of continuity, reform, and maternal leadership continues to resonate in the collective imagination. Maria Theresa's historical impact is multidimensional. She redefined female rulership, revitalized a struggling empire, and established a legacy that endured through war, revolution, and empire's collapse. Through portraits, reforms, dynastic marriages, and cultural memory, she remains etched into the fabric of European history. Her life, filled with contradiction and courage, continues to invite admiration, critique, and reflection. A true monarch of her time and a timeless figure of statecraft and strength. Maria Theresa's reign stood in the midst of a turbulent 18th century, characterized by shifting alliances, wars, and the rise of new dynasties and empires. She ruled in the company of some of the most formidable and influential monarchs of her time, such as Frederick the Great of Prussia, Louis XV of France, and Catherine the Great of Russia. Despite the profound differences in their political landscapes and approaches to governance, Maria Theresa's leadership can be compared to these contemporaries to better understand the challenges and opportunities she faced and the unique imprint she left on European history. Frederick the Great, the King of Prussia, was Maria Theresa's most formidable rival during the War of the Austrian Succession and the 7 Years' War. Frederick's military prowess and reforms made him a symbol of Enlightenment absolutism, a ruler who valued strength, discipline, and efficiency above all else. His expansionist ambitions, particularly in his acquisition of Silesia, forced Maria Theresa into a defensive posture throughout much of her reign. Where Frederick was a pragmatist who emphasized the role of the military in securing his state, Maria Theresa focused on preserving her realm from external threats while strengthening its internal stability. Frederick's reign was marked by a willingness to embrace the ideas of the Enlightenment, including religious tolerance and legal reforms, although his policies were often shaped by realpolitik rather than ideological convictions. In contrast, Maria Theresa's reign was characterized by a more conservative Catholic vision, which limited the scope of her reforms. Louis XV of France, the long-reigning monarch who presided over the decline of the French monarchy, represents another important comparison. While Maria Theresa's reign focused on maintaining and modernizing a large, diverse empire, Louis XV's France became entangled in costly wars that ultimately led to the weakening of royal power and the onset of the French Revolution. Louis XV, unlike Maria Theresa, did not take an active role in government and delegated much of the administration to ministers. His detachment from the day-to-day affairs of the state, combined with ineffective decision-making, contributed to his kingdom's instability. In contrast, Maria Theresa's hands-on approach to governance, her reform initiatives, and her unrelenting commitment to the stability of the Habsburg monarchy set her apart from the passivity and irresponsibility that plagued Louis XV's reign. Catherine the Great of Russia provides perhaps the most striking contrast and comparison with Maria Theresa. Like Maria Theresa, Catherine ascended to the throne through marriage, although her path to power was marked by more intrigue and political maneuvering than Maria Theresa's relatively straightforward succession. Both women were Enlightenment monarchs who sought to modernize their states and implement reforms. However, Catherine's approach to reform was bolder and more ideologically driven. She corresponded with many of the period's leading philosophers, such as Voltaire and Diderot, and was influenced by the Enlightenment ideals of liberty, reason, and progress. In contrast, Maria Theresa's reforms, though significant, were generally more conservative. While she implemented legal codifications and sought to modernize the economy, she remained rooted in the Catholic, absolutist traditions of her dynasty. Despite these differences, both Maria Theresa and Catherine the Great navigated the challenges of being female rulers in male-dominated societies. Both women asserted their authority in ways that were deeply informed by their roles as mothers and wives. While Catherine's reforms were more radical, and her political ambitions often set her at odds with her advisors and even her own son, Maria Theresa balanced her reform efforts with the need to preserve the dynastic integrity of the Habsburg monarchy. Her maternal leadership, which blended political authority with a nurturing public image, endeared her to her people and solidified her position as a ruler in a way that was not only politically effective but culturally significant. The leadership styles of these monarchs also influenced the diplomatic and military landscapes of 18th-century Europe. Frederick the Great's aggressive expansionism and his determination to assert Prussia's dominance in Europe led to a series of conflicts that reshaped the continent. Maria Theresa, in contrast, was often forced into a reactive stance, using diplomacy to forge alliances in the face of external threats. Her marriage to Francis Stephen, which was both a personal union and a strategic political alliance, exemplified her diplomatic acumen. The Treaty of Aix-la-Chapelle, 1748, which ended the War of the Austrian Succession, highlighted her ability to negotiate and secure the interests of her empire, even if it meant conceding Silesia to Frederick. Her leadership in the 7 Years' War, 1756 to 1763, demonstrated her persistence and ability to forge strong military and diplomatic coalitions with France and Russia, although the loss of Silesia once again underscored the challenges of her reign. Catherine the Great's diplomatic finesse, her successful alliances, and her expansionist policies in the Black Sea region, Poland, and the Caucasus were in many ways the opposite of Maria Theresa's more defensive and cautious approach. While Maria Theresa's diplomacy was often reactive, Catherine seized the opportunity to expand Russian influence across Europe and Asia. Despite their differences, both women were highly skilled in managing their relationships with other powers, and their political acumen allowed them to shape the future of their respective empires. As Maria Theresa's reign came to an end in 1780, the immediate legacy she left was one of consolidation, reform, and perseverance in the face of adversity. Her successor, Joseph II, would take her reformist agenda further, though with a more radical edge. Joseph's policies, particularly his attempts to reduce the power of the Catholic Church and centralize authority in Vienna, would meet resistance and have mixed results. Nonetheless, Maria Theresa's role in strengthening the Habsburg monarchy, especially through her administrative reforms, her handling of military affairs, and her social and cultural policies, was crucial for the future stability of the empire. Maria Theresa's legacy also transcends her political achievements. She was a mother to 16 children, and her influence on her offspring, particularly her daughters, was immense. Her daughter Marie Antoinette's marriage to Louis XVI of France has perhaps become the most famous and tragic result of Maria Theresa's dynastic strategies. Through her children's marriages to other royal families across Europe, Maria Theresa ensured that the Habsburgs remained at the center of European politics for generations. Her position as a matriarchal figure extended beyond her immediate family, making her a symbol of female power and leadership in a period when such authority was often the exception rather than the rule. Maria Theresa's reign was a remarkable blend of strength, diplomacy, maternal leadership, and political savvy. Her ability to navigate the intricacies of European diplomacy, the challenges of warfare, and the demands of reform in a male-dominated world places her among the most significant monarchs of the 18th century. In contrast to her contemporaries, Frederick the Great's militarism, Louis XV's detachment, and Catherine the Great's radicalism, Maria Theresa carved out a unique place for herself. Her leadership was defined not just by her political actions, but by the example she set as a mother, a ruler, and a matriarch of an empire. The legacy of her reign, both in the Habsburg monarchy and in the broader European context, remains a testament to her remarkable leadership. Her multifaceted legacy as a warrior, reformer, mother, and ruler continues to resonate in historical memory, making her one of the most enduring figures in European history.